until it's smooth, because it doesn't quite get smooth. So just stir it until it's all combined. And then take that mixture and lay it out on a piece of parchment or wax paper or something along those lines, and you need to leave it for about 5 hours. And then at that point, you need it to soften it. And from there, your modeling chocolate is ready to go. And we have all sorts of color that we've used. And if you wrap it in a plastic bag, it will last for a very long period of time. It stays relatively soft and pliable. We've got this nice red color here. And the nice thing about buying the candy melts is that it comes colored for you. So whatever project you have, you can buy the colors that you need. And if you only need a little bit of that color, you can save it for another project. Really, it'll last a year. It's, as long as chocolate lasts. The flavor might start to deteriorate after a little while, but just leave it at room temperature. And you can see it stiffens up and loses a bit of its sheen. So you just have to warm it up between your hands. And soften it. And we've got some other colors here. Does anybody want to help soften some of this? You just have to squeeze it between your hands. I'll give you this chunk here. Are you up for it? Do you want to give it a try? It's a little bit tough, so you got to use both hands and squeeze tightly. We've got some green too. Green's a little bit tougher. So you can see when it starts off, it doesn't look very pretty. It doesn't look like a nice clay, but when you keep kneading it with your hands don't get too sticky either. The chocolate stays where it is. Would you like to try the blue? No, thank you? Okay. Anybody else want to feel it?
Oh, sure.
So, I've got the red here. And I'm going to make a rose out of it, which I think seems a little intimidating at first, but when you see step by step, it's actually pretty easy to make a rose. And with all the different colors, you can make a whole bouquet of different colored flowers. So sometimes it helps to knead it against the bench, the table, just to soften it. And then I'm going to roll it out on some of this paper. This is just a little piece of wax paper so that it helps it from sticking to the table. We have a little rolling pin, but you can use any rolling pin that you want. So I'm just rolling it until it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. And then I can cut my petals out of it. I think that'll give me a good part to work with. Kayla, will you keep rolling this out? I'm going to cut one little petal, and then if you could roll out the rest of it a bit thinner, because it's pretty thick right there. Thank you. So, to start, you need to have a base for the petals to stay on. So you make a Hershey kiss, the shape of a Hershey kiss. So basically it's a cone. So start by rolling it into a ball, and then pinch one side, kind of keep forming it until you get a point on one end of the ball, and then you can flatten the other side. So it looks similar to a Hershey kiss, and that'll be the base of the rose. And then you cut out a circle. You can pinch the edges of the circle so that if you think of a rose that has very delicate petals, we just want the edges to look delicate because the other side is pretty thick, and that'll help hold the shape. But we want the rest of it to look soft and delicate. So just between your fingers, you're just going to pinch the very edge to thin it out. So the rest of it stays nice and thick, and the outside is a little bit irregular now, which makes it look a little bit more natural. It's not a perfect circle. And then you're going to lay this around your base. You can fan it out a little bit. So it's starting to look like the very bud of a rose. You can pinch off any excess. And now we do a couple more petals. You can use any circle cutter that you have, and the size of the circle cutter will determine how big the rose will end up being. So if you have just a small little circle, then you'll have small petals, which make a small rose. So pinch out the edges. You can also lay this on the parchment, and with the back of a spoon, rub the edges to thin it out a little bit more too. So again, I've got the same shape, and I'm going to wrap this around. I want it just a little bit higher than the last one. So I've got one petal on there, and just flick the top edge back a little bit. It's starting to look a little bit more like a rose. Let's see. I want to pinch some of the edges a little bit. The nice thing about modeling chocolate is it's kid-friendly. Anybody can work with it. It's not excessively hot or anything like that. And it's easy to play with. It doesn't take too much effort to get a nice little shape. You can make any kind of figurine, any sculpture out of it. So if you guys like playing with Play-Doh, you can do the same thing, make the same similar shapes with this. And after a couple hours, it starts to harden a little bit, which if you want to keep it for a while is a good thing. But if in a couple weeks you're sick of the little sculpture that you made, the figurine, you can go ahead and take your finished product, squeeze it in your hand, knead it back down, and you can play with it again. Okay. All right. So.
We give these back.
Yes. Oh, is it getting sticky? Yeah.
Our hands will warm.
That is the thing. That does determine how long you can actually hold on to the chocolate. Some people have cold hands and you can work with it for a while.
People like me.
Now you've got both hands. Both sides of my hand. Good.
It'll come off if you just wash your hands.
One more? Okay. So now, you have hot hands too, I can see this. So, we have our rose right here. Just like that. Yeah. So if you do several of these and arrange them on a cake, or you can even put them on a skewer or something like that, just for a pretty arrangement on the table, and it's completely edible. There's another one, a calla lily is pretty easy to make as well. We didn't have white chocolate, but we do have this speckled confetti chocolate that I'll show you. Calla lily is made with a heart cutter. So if you don't have a heart cutter, you can use a knife to just kind of freehand cut a shape. It doesn't have to be exact. There are certain brands of chocolates. Wilton, the recipe I gave you with the 1 bag to a 1/4 cup of corn syrup works great for that, and you can look that up online. If you go to cake shops regularly, they have a different, most cake shops, like Eaton's has a different brand. It's called Merkin's, and that recipe is a tiny bit different, but you can still use the same recipe with 12 ounces to a 1/4 cup, and it'll work out just fine. This chocolate's a little bit soft, so perhaps we'll use a different one, because I don't think that'll stand up. Can we handle a hot pink calla lily? So the trick about flowers is making the edges nice and delicate so that it looks more realistic. Okay, so cut out the heart shape. Pinch the edges, let you pinch the edges. We need a stamen in the center. We can do that out of this. So the centerpiece, usually you would use a yellow because that's what, it's usually yellow and white for a lot of calla lilies, but they have the colored ones. You just make a little worm shape. And that's going to be the stamen inside the calla lily. Okay. I'm going to point this towards you. You probably can't see it if I put it on the table. You want the top of the heart pointing up, and the curved part of the heart is going to be the base. You put your little stamen a little off center, roll it into the center, and you have a calla lily just like that. Do you guys recognize this flower? The colors are a little funky. You don't usually find this at the florist, but I think you can see what it is. And again, if you put this on a wire or a wooden skewer, something like that, you can stab it into a cake, put it on top of a cupcake, or make it a bouquet arrangement out of it. And you can see that these are just flowers, but if you start using your imagination, you can make absolutely anything out of this. And it's a lot of fun to work with, and it tastes delicious. Does anybody have any questions about it?
Yes.
Yes.
Store it, like if you wanted.
For long term?
Yeah.
Yep. I like to shape it into logs. Here's one here. The chocolate one I use most often. A lot of times I'll just use regular chocolate. It firms up a lot more. But I think a chocolate cake with beautiful chocolate roses on it is very elegant, and it's easy to make. So you'll stir your mixture together, lay it out on a piece of parchment, wax paper, or even plastic wrap, and let it sit for about 5 hours at room temperature. It's just going to be sort of a puddle of chocolate mess. And then you need to, once it hardens, knead it together until it's nice and smooth. I like to shape it into a log so that I can take a knife and cut off the portion I need, because right now this chocolate is really, really hard, but if I cut off a small piece of it, I can work it with my hands and soften it that way. And then once it's in this shape, it's really easy to store it in a plastic bag. It doesn't have to be airtight. You just don't want it drying out too much because it'll get a little bit of a skin on the outside, and it'll just sort of, if you see this one here, this one wasn't kneaded all the way before it was put back, and it gets kind of this white little jagged edges to it, and it just takes a little bit more effort to smooth it out again. So maybe next year we'll see some entries with some modeling chocolate. All right. Any other questions?